Howdy, let's talk SpongeBob. Specifically, the very first days of SpongeBob, when he was technically still a teenager and just moved into Bikini Bottom. We'll check out every single Season 1 episode fresh through the eyes of 2024 and see how they hold up 25 years later. I'll rank them from worst to best, in my opinion anyway. Also, just a warning ahead, this will be among the longest videos I've ever done. I'm giving a proper review to every single episode, and there's 41 episodes. So I've put the video into chapters if you do want to jump about and look at certain episodes. But if you just want to cruise along at your own pace, jump in and out when you want, I look forward to hanging out with you. Anyway, let's begin. Let's start with an easy choice for the worst. Jellyfishing. There was no question for me. This was the worst episode of classic SpongeBob. How does such a simple title turn into such an obnoxious Squidward torture episode? Squidward is injured while jellyfishing, and basically Spongy and Patrick act like the worst neighbors ever while he's helpless to defend himself. I could rant on about how repetitive and unfunny this foreboding claptrap is, but I'm curious of the Scumbob Wiki's thoughts on this truly abysmal episode.
This episode stings you. It's because Squidward goes through hell. All the while, SpongeBob and Patrick don't care, especially when he
firmly grasp it!
I agreed with the commenter Mayonnaise's thoughts.
How is this only semi-infamous? It's like Good Neighbours or Ink Lemonade. Squidward is even covered in bandages and in a wheelchair for half the episode.
Yeah, the fact that Squidward is in a wheelchair as he's injured repeatedly has never sat well for me in general. It's just an uncomfortable bore fest of an episode. Our next terrible choice is Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. Oh, this episode is weak. I gotta let you in on a dirty secret. I'm not proud of it, but I personally don't enjoy Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes. I find them kind of a bore. The shtick tends to always be the same. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are old, and we mostly just get old people geezer jokes from them. We get it. Everyone gets old. It's not funny or clever. The other thing endlessly hammered home is that SpongeBob and Patrick are huge fans of their show. Like, huge fans.
Come on, Barnacle Boy. There's evil afoot.
The shtick here is always the same. Mermaid Man seems to be insane, paranoid, and delusional because he's old, I guess? And Barnacle Boy is reluctant. And I'm sorry, I just can't find making fun of old people particularly interesting or funny.
Old people are the greatest. They're full of wisdom and experience.
Because I'm acutely aware everyone gets old eventually. And I swear, some of these jokes just go on. I've clocked it, and Mermaid Man is just moaning the word evil repeatedly for like a solid half minute here. It's unbearable. The episode's basically just one undignified old joke, one after the other. And SpongeBob just doesn't realize his two elderly heroes have earned the right to hang up their capes and have a life of peace and quiet. Finishing the episode, I was downright relieved to see the end of this 11 minutes. Next up, we have Jellyfish Jam. Is it weird to say I really don't like this episode? Basically, after SpongeBob goes jellyfish hunting, the jellyfish start stalking him and won't leave him alone.
Jellyfish, you've got to stay here.
He makes a mistake of taking one home, and we get perhaps my least favorite trope of all time, the thing that would not leave. Where a guest drastically overstays their welcome, makes life miserable for the host, and the host just can't get rid of them. Sonic did it, Rocko's Modern Life did it, Simpsons did it, and those are just a few examples. It's uncomfortable, it's predictable, it's boring. I'm just so glad we don't have to see this trope as often anymore. I know of some people who like the visuals of this episode, but I just find these repeated disco dancing scenes boring. The jellyfish take over SpongeBob's house, and we're just back to that stupid thing that wouldn't leave trope. There's just one really cool part at the last minute of the episode, and that's the jamming song that SpongeBob puts on to get rid of the jellyfish. It's catchy, it's creative, and it's using the sounds of the ocean in one of the most unique songs the series has ever created, even today. But this is the only part of it I like. I otherwise consider it among the weakest episodes of the first season. Next up, we have Sandy's Rocket.
Hey, what's so funny? Oh, Marge, grow up.
Sandy's made a rocket and she's going to the moon. And after much begging, she reluctantly agrees to take our spongy friend along. This right here would have been fun. I would have loved to see SpongeBob and Sandy go to the moon. But instead, Patrick comes in and just causes havoc, hijacking Sandy's rocket and taking off with SpongeBob for the moon, while Sandy is still sleeping.
Oh, SpongeBob.
I don't hear people talk about this early SpongeBob episode very much, and personally, I kinda get why. Technically, it should be interesting. SpongeBob literally travels to outer space, albeit briefly. That should be fascinating. But I find myself rolling my eyes at how predictable and repetitive these jokes are. And yeah, not a single joke in the entire episode made me laugh. SpongeBob and Patrick end up missing the moon and traveling right back to Bikini Bottom in the rocket, but they think they're on the moon. So they capture everyone in Bikini Bottom because they think they're aliens. And I hope you laugh because that's the main joke of the entire episode. But to me, forcefully capturing aliens feels very out of character for SpongeBob. It's not like he's even defending himself from them, he just captures them immediately. But since when does SpongeBob ever capture people against their will? Outside this episode, it's very rare to see SpongeBob this hostile and paranoid. In fact, he's normally incredibly friendly and perhaps too trusting. It's SpongeBob. I think Musune Liku in my Patreon put it quite well.
I could see Patrick being the paranoid one, but SpongeBob should have been more positive and open. Maybe we could have had the back and forth of, SpongeBob, look out, it's the alien. And he says, hey, that alien looks like Sandy. Let's go say hi.
For me, Sandy's rocket was one of the most forgettable episodes of Season 1. Our next spongy episode is Valentine's Day. Obviously, it's Valentine's Day and SpongeBob's got a present for Patrick. While this is a favourite episode for many, I personally don't get it. I've watched it a few times and I consider it subpar at best. It's mainly just the same shtick for the whole runtime. There's this ginormous build-up for Patrick's Valentine's present as SpongeBob and Sandy prepare it. Then when the present crashes, SpongeBob offers a handshake to Patrick instead. This puts Pat into bitter resentment, for some reason. Followed by what I can only describe as the first instance of Jerk Patrick in the series. He trashes the entire theme park in a fit of rage.
Nope, it's too late for that now. For all of you.
Interestingly, the Scumbob Wiki is less critical of this one than me. They don't label Valentine's as a Scumbob episode, but they do label this rampage scene as Scumbob, according to the website.
This scene is unfair to people at the carnival. He ruined everyone's Valentine's fun and never apologised. It's also a bad moral because Patrick stole someone's lollipop, which is a crime. This could have got Patrick arrested. He's losing
They're
it.
trying to mess with me. I swear they are on that wiki.
I mean, I guess that'd be a slow day at the station. Throw this guy into the slammer next to the cereal strangler because he stole a lollipop and it was strawberry flavored. Anyway, eventually Sandy comes in and saves SpongeBob from his quote-unquote friend. But I don't know, if I was SpongeBob, after seeing malicious red flags like this from Patrick, I'd definitely start distancing myself from him. As I said in a previous video, a friend could give me a handshake and I wouldn't mind. What matters is if your friend thinks about you on that day. And then there's this drawn out joke where Patrick refuses to turn around for like a solid minute, which really felt like it was just added on for the runtime's sake. In my personal opinion, Valentine's was one of the weakest episodes of the first season, but if you disagree, I'd love to hear what you like about it. Enlighten me. Our next SpongeBob episode is Reef Blower, also known as the pilot extension. It has 0 dialogue. Apparently it was meant to serve as a 3-minute extension to the pilot. This would turn the episode into a full half show, and since they didn't want to pay session fees to bring the voice cast back in for this, dialogue was avoided completely. As a result, Reef Blower is exclusively based on animation jokes. I find it a little drier purely because of that handicap of it not having any dialogue. However, it is a really short episode, not spanning a total of 3 minutes. Talk about being ahead of its time for the TikTok era, it does not overstay its welcome. Squidward wants some peace and quiet, but Spongy pulls out his Reef Blower to fix a tiny shell on an otherwise clean lawn. As a result, he causes a lot of trouble for Squidward. A fun little animation tidbit I like here is how we get to see all of Squidward and his house outside of the water as he was originally envisioned. In the dry, there's a darker purple color, with a less strong blue hue to his house. This is such a short, uneventful episode that it's more like a bonus DVD extra. It's interesting, but certainly nothing to write home about. Next up, we have Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost. SpongeBob and Patrick knock over a wax sculpture of Squidward, which of course makes them think Squidward is dead.
He's pushing up daisies!
Oh, I thought he was dead.
And when Squiddy comes out of the bath all misty, they're certain he's come back as a spooky ghost. Even if it's not an inherently bad episode, I found it pretty forgettable. Probably my favorite part is when Squidward gives himself a ghostly voice.
Squidward's ghost is feeling unusually generous today.
Overall though, it just wasn't that funny to me. It's mostly just Squidward ordering SpongeBob and Patrick around and them trying to put his ghost to rest.
Are you crazy? I'm not getting in that thing.
But you said we could put you to rest.
So he finally comes clean and, well, that's basically it. Frankly, it's one of the most straightforward episodes I've seen in the show, but also pretty forgettable. And next up, we got Naughty Nautical Neighbours. It's interesting when I see this Season 1 animation because the movement reminds me so much of Rocko's Modern Life. The episode starts with SpongeBob and Patrick sending each other messages in bubbles.
Hi, Patrick.
Only for Squidward to intervene and secretly send them rude messages to each other.
Patrick, you are the dumbest idiot it has ever been my misfortune to know.
And Squidward seems to just really enjoy the hostility he creates between the two. Honestly, I have about as much love for these overdone misunderstanding plots as Doug does. So none, they mostly annoy me. Interestingly, Patrick actually gives CPR, sort of, to Squidward after he chokes and saves his life.
I win!
So Squidward asks to be his new friend, which is a nice interesting change. This is known as a classic episode, but I personally didn't find that many memorable or funny jokes. Just SpongeBob and Patrick competing to be Squidward's friend and instead just annoying him.
Squidward is my best friend in the world. Squidward.
Until he eventually relents and brings them together again so he can just be away from them. Despite me finding this episode kinda dull, it actually does have some really good reviews on IMDb. For example, Frampton Hollis said,
An astonishing mix of mild morals and side-splitting cartoon comedy. Nearly every single joke is perfectly constructed, and there isn't a boring or uninteresting moment. Also, the subtle sensual undertones I began picking up from this episode's more adult jokes only added to my enjoyment.
I actually rewatched the episode after seeing these comments, and yeah, they're right. So there is. The most obvious one I found was this.
My best friend and my ex-best friend and rubber bath toys.
Anyway, in my opinion, there's certainly nothing offensively bad about this episode. Didn't make me laugh, but it's okay. You'll probably enjoy it fine. Next up, we have the episode F.U.N. We start this episode with Plankton trying to steal the Krabby Patty, but SpongeBob tracks him down. But this time, there's a catch.
Here! Take the stupid patty. I don't want the secret recipe anyway.
Plankton just gives up. And through doing this, the episode expands a lot upon Plankton's character. He's hated by the town and an outcast for what he does, and he's seen as a failure.
I bet if he had just one friend, he wouldn't be such a meanie.
Honestly, Spongy, you'd be surprised how many sophisticated police rehabilitations find just that. So SpongeBob tries to be a friend to Plankton and help him find hobbies other than trying to steal that stupid burger. Sadly, Plankton mostly takes this as an opportunity to steal the Krabby Patty again. But it's also really beautiful the fact that SpongeBob reaches out to Plankton and we get to see some real cool scenes through it, like in the Fun song. And eventually, SpongeBob actually seems to get through to Plankton, and Plankton's able to experience a little fun with SpongeBob. But in the end, he ends up trying to steal the Krabby Patty. Boring. This episode was okay, but I found it more mediocre because of its ending. I've ranked it higher in previous videos, but nowadays I see it as a bit of a missed opportunity. I liked seeing that different side to Plankton, but it felt so status quo that Plankton had to steal the Krabby Patty at the end. I said it 3 years ago, I'll say it again.
Don't blame him, lad.
Blame the status quo. We gotta keep this franchise running for another 12 years, laddie.
The next episode is a very memorable one. I was a teenage Gary. It's the annual Jellyfish convention. So Spongy asked Squidward to watch Gary for the weekend. Delighted at the prospect of some quiet time without SpongeBob and Patrick, Squidward is more than happy to help. But it kinda surprised me to see Squidward isn't very good at taking care of pets. In fact, he forgets to feed Gary completely for 3 days. I guess it's not that surprising given how little care he takes in his work at the Krusty Krab. But you know, there's more than fast food sales at stake with Gary. Unsurprisingly, Spongy Snail ends up very sick, and the doctor prescribes him snail plasma. But everyone's too squeamish to give Gary the plasma, including the doctor for some reason. Gary's okay in the end, but SpongeBob is accidentally injected with snail plasma by Squidward, and thus a dozen terrible SpongeBob creepypastas were born. As SpongeBob eventually transforms into a snail, it's a slow, creepy descent, and he begins by having a taste for snail food. He then starts meowing, moving more slowly, and then we can see him begin to transform in the mirror.
I take it back, Gary. Something is wrong with me.
This ironically comes directly after the Halloween episode. And frankly, this episode is much spookier than Scaredy Pants. This slow transformation is memorable in how gradual, strange, and disturbingly done it is. And rewatching it, I can see why it inspired so many spooky campfire stories. Even small moments like the way Squidward touches SpongeBob's eye and it slowly retracts like a snail. Ugh. It's also grotesque feeling, while still managing to stay very G-rated. I literally said out loud, ugh, when I rewatched this scene, which is testament to how well it's aged. Needless to say, the Spongebob Wiki had a bone to pick with this episode.
I'd rather drink snail plasma than watch this episode. Squidward is unlikable because he agrees to babysit Gary, but just ignores him. It's also a torture episode for Gary because he's not fed or given water until halfway through. It's also torture for SpongeBob because he turns into a snail. And the doctor didn't do his job.
I mean, I actually think those are fair points. Personally, I don't really care for these disturbing endings in shows either, but it is a unique novelty, you know? Overall, I didn't find any real laughs here. It's just a disturbingly memorable, strange episode. Next up, we have Boating School.
I'm not ready.
This is our first introduction to Mrs. Puff, the reluctant but well-meaning boating teacher of SpongeBob. And we also see SpongeBob's endless and groundless self-confidence that he will in fact pass his boating exam.
Well, pal, I won't be needing you anymore. I'm ready.
But it was a mandate from Mr. Hellberg himself that SpongeBob never get his boating license. And that probably is the best thing for Bikini Bottom. But not for lack of trying on SpongeBob's part. We can see by no means does SpongeBob not have a strong knowledge of the boat. And he passes the oral test with flying colors.
Right is...
Starboard, port, skipper, deck, cabin, galley, keel, 1924.
You've passed the oral test.
But whenever he gets into the boating seat, he just crumbles with anxiety. You could say he had a meltdown.
Start the boat. SpongeBob, relax. It's only the boat.
It's definitely a moment where I can see SpongeBob being on the autism spectrum more clearly, because he excels on the knowledge part but isn't so good in practicality at that particular skill.
Hey, Florence!
And the way his anxiety just sort of eats at him at times. And as someone who failed his driving exam 3 times, I can relate. Well, SpongeBob has failed 38 times, but still, I can at least empathize.
I've already taken it 37 times. Meow. Okay, 38.
You know, it's a small detail, but something I really miss about this early SpongeBob that I see less in mid-seasons particularly, is that SpongeBob could actually get bummed out. He's only human, the sentient sea sponge, and he has emotional downs and losses here, and he has to come back from them. It's relatable for him to get down in the dumps after a failure. I like that. Kids and adults can relate to that, you know? I also like that he's a little short with Patrick when he gets woken and doesn't really care about his joke.
I don't know, Patrick.
Patrick Squarepants!
Pat, don't do that.
He's not just mindlessly laughing at everything, he feels more real. Anyway, Patrick offers to give SpongeBob instructions as he's doing the test, by using a walkie-talkie through an antenna in his head.
Hello?
Hey, I can hear you in my head.
And when SpongeBob got that stupid hat on his head, I legitimately burst out chuckling. I can't help but grin at this whole setup. We know somehow something is going to go horribly wrong, but just how catastrophically will this go wrong? This was made fun by both Puff's reactions to everything and SpongeBob crumbling competence behind the wheel. We can see how likable and hard-working Puff is because she really does want to see SpongeBob succeed. She's much more likable than someone like Miss Hoover from The Simpsons because she genuinely does try. But 38 crashes later, who can blame her for being a little reluctant? Our next episode is Opposite Day. There's a couple of good laughs in this episode, but it's always made me feel a bit bad for Squidward. You see, Squidward wants to sell his house. He wants to get away from SpongeBob once and for all. He's trying to actively remove himself from the problem, which the real estate agency can do, with some conditions.
As long as it's not infested with nematodes, or surrounded by troublesome neighbors or something like that.
Oh, sure, there's none of that.
I mean, in 1999 this might have been accurate, but in 2024 she could sell this house in a heartbeat on the land alone with 30 immediate offers, even if SpongeBob and Patrick tried to murder the neighbors. Anyway, Squidward convinces Spongy and Patrick that it's opposite day, so they'll act more, dull for the day. And Spongy does do that, for about 40 seconds, before he starts doing lots of silly things the opposite way. And eventually, he starts pretending to be Squidward and upsetting the real estate agent.
I hear you loud and clear.
Get away from her!
Who again, I don't think would give two craps about this in 2024. They might lose $1,000 on a $1.2 million sales margin? Ugh, anyway, but I'm taking this too seriously. It's opposite day. I think viewers enjoy the creativity in this episode. And it's nostalgic because I think a lot of people have played Opposite Day growing up. It's a really fun game and it requires a little lateral thinking.
I made my house a mess, which was making it clean, which made Squidward clean my yard.
I admit, I don't like how trapped Squidward feels at the end of the episode, and I honestly don't laugh a whole lot, but I personally consider it okay, and I get why a lot of people enjoy it. Our next episode is Musclebob Buffpants. One of the most interesting things I found about SpongeBob in this first season is how much he struggles with his personal image, his physicality, and coming to terms with his quote-unquote manliness. And as we see in the first movie, this is something it takes him many years to fully come to terms with. And it kind of makes sense as he's probably about 17 at this point. We can see a few episodes later in Employee of the Month, he's been on the Employee of the Month wall 43 times, meaning at that point he's been at the Krusty Krab for 3.5 years. So if he started there at the minimum working age of 14, he'd be about 17 by this episode. And like some other people that age, he wants his self-image to be buff and strong.
La 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 la, la 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 la.
Unfortunately, as we see here and as we saw in the first episode, our buddy Spongy is just not a big lifter, and it's probably not a good pursuit of his time.
I don't want to disappoint you, SpongeBob, but you won't see any progress lifting those.
While I do find Musclebob an overrated episode, I also find it a relatable episode, because this is pretty much how I pictured being buff at 17.
Sandy does try to train him, but strength work just isn't the fry cook's thing. Maybe Spongy's more of a runner? He could always try more cardio. But shockingly, one whole day of training wasn't enough to completely transform his body, and he's got a little post-onset muscle soreness. Therefore, he gives up and just decides to go for fake arms. And that's pretty much the running joke for this episode. SpongeBob's ridiculously weak and has fake buff arms. But hey, it's an interesting visual, and the episode gives us a lot of insight into SpongeBob's insecurities in these early seasons. Our next choice is Walking Small. Welcome back to the Blue Lagoon. where Plankton recruits SpongeBob into his training program to teach Spongy how to be more assertive.
No, be assertive! Beep, beep. Not insertive!
Ironically, these early seasons are probably the most assertive SpongeBob ever is. This little guy stands up to the sea god Poseidon to protect his friends. He even stands up to his boss and boots him out of his house at one point. And later, he believes in his pretty patties so much that he quits the Krusty Krab to pursue his passion of making them. But, you know, consistency can't be perfect. I guess for this episode, SpongeBob's a pushover. Because SpongeBob and Plankton always make for such an interesting duo. Plankton has this maniacal aggression, and it mixes well with SpongeBob's wholesome friendliness. Plankton keeps trying to get SpongeBob to be rude, but it always ends up backfiring and making SpongeBob even more friendly.
Tell that guy to go fall in the ditch!
Hey, go tuck in that ditch.
Wow, buried treasure.
But then, it happens. SpongeBob finally snaps and goes into being a minor nuisance to people at the beach, and the rush he feels is overwhelming. Honestly, I loved SpongeBob becoming a momentary agent of chaos, but when he sees Plankton used him for land development, he somehow undoes all the minor mayhem he caused, and I guess all is well again. The wholesomeness of this episode is just overwhelmingly sweet, and I really enjoyed it. Our next episode is called Sleepy Time. Spongy's hitting the hay. In fact, most of Bikini Bottom is. So we get a quick peek into their dreams, which gives us some unusual insights into who they really are. For example, in Gary's dream, he can talk and is a learned scholar.
In dreams, one is not tethered by earthly limitations.
I think dream episodes in cartoons are cool because they give writers a chance to do the things they'd otherwise never be able to do, such as letting SpongeBob drive a car, unsupervised, or letting Gary talk, or letting Squidward be an 18th century clarinet star, or letting Sandy skydive. Though, to be fair, that's exactly what she did in her recent movie. Or, craziest of all, they let Patrick ride a mall kiddie ride.
Shoot! That was my last quarter.
I really enjoy the variety of characters here. We even get an insight into Plankton and Pearl's dreams. In fact, this episode was enjoyed so much by the community that someone said, gee, we should make a game about this. And thus, Creature from the Krusty Krab was born. It's a very cute ending as well, as everyone arrives at SpongeBob's place to heckle him for bothering them in their dreams. And yeah, I get that, dreams are a private place. Our next choice is Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2, because apparently these two were just so much fun the first time. But to be fair, I think this is a much better episode than the original. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy give much more interesting performances.
We're not in the invisible boatmobile, are we?
Nope.
There's a lot more here than just old jokes. Instead, they're actual superheroes, and SpongeBob's taught the basic ropes of being a superhero by his two heroes. And I gotta admit, I really get caught up in Mermaid Man and SpongeBob's mirth patrolling the town singing their stupid songs. It's arguably the highlight of the episode. This seemed to be the anti-Scumbob Wiki's favorite part too, but you know, the comments gave me more insight than the article itself.
Jingle bells, Mermaid Man smells, Barnacle Boy laid an egg, lol.
The story is, SpongeBob's won a conch in the Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy contest. Blowing this conch summons the real Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, much to SpongeBob's absolute joy. And he calls them a lot, even to open a jar of mayonnaise. Eventually though, they do some real superhero jobs with him. We also meet one of my least favorite villains, a dirty bubble, seemingly capable of nothing apart from putting people inside his bubble. Joy. But personally, I found this episode a big improvement over the abysmal original.
If I weren't retired, I'd...
And Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy definitely started growing on me. Our next Season 1 episode is Neptune's Spatula. This is our second episode to see the fabled golden spatula. It originally showed up in the episode Plankton, but it plays a more important role here, being the fabled spatula in the stone for SpongeBob to pull out to summon Neptune.
Holy smokes!
But this spatula will be back as a game collectible many times in the future. Anyway, Neptune comes down from his throne to collect SpongeBob, the only fry cook worthy to wield his spatula. But Neptune just can't believe that Spongy is the one to be his new fry cook.
Am I expected to believe this creature is royal fry cook material?
He even zaps Patrick, and we're really shown here that Season 1 SpongeBob has one hell of a backbone.
You hurt my friend. You're not a king.
Willing to stand up to sea god Neptune when his friend is hurt. He agrees to challenge Neptune to a cook-off, and I find it really funny how much this show loves to show footage of Tom Kenny showering. I have no idea why, but it just cracks me up. If Spongy succeeds, he'll be Neptune's new fry cook in Atlantis. But if he fails, he must give up fry cooking forever. I mean, the stakes aren't that huge. You could always go to pizza making instead. You could use a new boss. And if I laugh at the fact that Patrick's literally talking out of his pants for half the episode, does that make me juvenile? Well, it's funny to me at least. In the cook-off, at first, SpongeBob seems severely outmatched. But in the end, SpongeBob again shows he is the secret ingredient because he actually gives a crap about the burger he makes. And as a result, his burger tastes fantastic.
Why, it tastes so good. I'd like to try it a second time.
While Neptune's burger tastes like garbage. But Neptune refuses to take along any of SpongeBob's friends to Atlantis, so the loyal Sponge wants to stay right where he is. But hey, for a brief moment, we got to see SpongeBob transformed into a sea god, so that's pretty cool. Our next episode is SB129. This is definitely among the weirdest episodes of the entire show. Squidward is trying to escape SpongeBob and Patrick, who are pestering him to play, so he hides in the Krusty Krab to try and play his clarinet in peace. However, in all his wisdom, he decides to hide in the freezer, and apparently, no one finds him for 2,000 freaking years.
A frozen cephalopod!
Did at no point in that time SpongeBob and Krabs ever go for like a frozen patty in the freezer? Either way, in the far future, SpongeBob is a jet-powered cyborg named Spongetron. Squidward takes the news he's 2,000 years in the future about as well as you'd think. Fun little Easter egg, we can see here on this calendar that Squidward is in the year 4011. This episode aired in 1999, so this would indicate the show is set 12 years in the future, 2011, since Squidward went exactly 2,000 years into the future. But I feel the SpongeBob timeline is confusing enough as is, so I'm just calling this one artistic license for the episode. Eventually, Squidward is given a time machine that sends him far into the past, where he meets prehistoric SpongeBob.
Well, I better be going now. Yes, that's my arm.
Honestly, I found these pretty stereotypical caveman jokes, and the whole thing just kinda drags for me a bit here. But things get much more interesting and strange when Squidward breaks the machine and goes to... well, I don't know where. Nowhere, I guess. I guess that's it, he goes to nowhere. But the isolation quickly gets to him. And yeah, I bet it is an existentially unsettling feeling being in the vacuum of nowhere. When he begs to be taken home, the time machine does take him home. I guess it's voice activated. Even if there aren't that many jokes in SB129, it's a very unique episode that solidified itself in SpongeBob fans' memories for how strange it is. Our next episode is Hooky. Krabs tells us the story of the terrible hooks, which have returned to Bikini Bottom. And they're basically our real-world fishing lines, and we can reel citizens of Bikini Bottom onto the surface, where we might eat them, or, according to Krabs, the worst possible fate.
What could be worse than that?
Gift shops.
This is actually a cool foreshadowing of the first movie, where SpongeBob and Patrick are literally dried to death in the gift shop. Anyway, SpongeBob plays Hooky from work, hence the title, and Patrick takes him to see the hooks. Here on the surface, we can't always see what's happening at the bottom of the hook where the fish bites. So it's interesting for the show to play with our imagination like this. Maybe SpongeBob and Patrick are at the bottom of the hooks, using them as free rides to fly up high. But Krabs catches them, and they promise not to go on the hooks again, and SpongeBob is willing to stick to that promise.
But then Patrick goes, "I'm a starfish, see ya!"
And he flies up the hooks again.
Come on, SpongeBob! You know you want to!
Jeebus, this starfish is a bad influence. He's peer pressuring him into playing with literal sharp objects. How dumb can you get? but I think this episode catches that essence of temptation. When you have something you want to do, but you know that you shouldn't. It's like in Family Guy, that do not push button that Peter finds. You and I both want him to push it. And what do you know, Spongy gets hooked. You just couldn't have caught the starfish instead, could you? Oh wait, they did. Never mind. Either way, our good sponge starts a habit that certainly won't be the last. He goes el naturel in public. He's still embarrassed about it back here, but in his later episodes, he comes to embrace his naked side. I'm all for body positivity, but perhaps he embraces his nakedness too much. Our next choice is Scaredy Pants. With his vivid imagination, SpongeBob can get very scared, especially around Halloween. In fact, he's known as SpongeBob Scaredy Pants by many.
Scaredy Pants gets easier to scare every year!
So he plans with Patrick to come up with a scary costume to wear at Crab's Halloween party. When SpongeBob makes his scary costume, they run around the town just having fun being scary. And it's surprisingly nostalgic watching, because it takes me back to my childhood, just running around in a costume pretending to be scary. While I didn't laugh a lot in this episode, it's hard not to get caught up in SpongeBob and Patrick's excitement here. And it reminds me of that original early season chemistry these two had, where I legitimately enjoyed watching them play together. Where it was simple, they helped each other and had fun together. And of course, we have our first on-screen appearance of Flying Dutchman in the show, aside from him being shown in a book in the Unfriendly Ghost earlier. And we have the censored ending where SpongeBob's brain is shown. Apparently, originally they showed more of a close-up of his brain, but Tom Kenny was later asked to add in the line,
"Don't worry, it grows back,"
at the end to make it less scary. I was very curious of the discourse around this episode. According to the anti-Scumbob wiki,
this episode doesn't deserve to live near a graveyard under the sea. It's very creative and an interesting debut of Halloween-themed episodes.
I agree. It was enjoyable and charming and an interesting first Halloween debut. Our next choice is Fools in April. It's April Fool's Day, and SpongeBob is a big participant in the day. Much like the Walking Small episode, we see many of Bikini Bottom's citizens receive minor inconveniences.
Hey, what's that?
Oh, I didn't see anything. Hey.
Like SpongeBob tells one person the spoon cutlery is, gasp, the fork cutlery.
Oh.
Or giving a customer one ice cube in his drink when he asks for two.
I guess that is pretty funny.
I feel like if I ever participated in April Fools, these are the kind of fools I'd want to do on people too. The main problem I have with this episode is that SpongeBob's laughing gets a little too much and a little too obnoxious. Like, I think SpongeBob's laugh is spectacular in small quantities. It's like spice. If you use just a little too much, it destroys the entire experience. Infuriated, Squidward pulls an April Fool's on SpongeBob that's a whole lot more intense. The citizens feel bad for SpongeBob here, but honestly, I'm just kind of glad to see Squidward laughing and getting in the festive spirit. He's not hurt, he's a sponge, what does it matter? But in order to play another April Fool's, SpongeBob runs off crying.
You stink! Wait! Why is it whenever I'm having fun, it's wrong?
I know, buddy, I know. The show really likes to beat up on you sometimes. But when Squidward goes to SpongeBob to apologize, they all surprise him. Because that whole scene was apparently the April Fool's joke. It's a fun turn of events, and it certainly captures the spirit of April Fools better than I could have imagined. Because you know what? I've watched this episode 3 to 4 times, and I was fooled by that ending again. Bravo, Spongy. Our next Spongy episode is Chaperone. This is our first big appearance of Pearl, one of my favorite characters. She has one of my favorite voice actors, a tenacious personality, and it's interesting seeing how a whale her size interacts in such a small world. Anyway, Pearl needs a chaperone to the prom, and she agrees that she'd rather take SpongeBob over her dad or Squidward. And yeah, the choices weren't great. But Spongy isn't too confident as he could never get a date for his own prom back in the day.
No, that was Patrick who brought his mom.
But SpongeBob gets resourceful and puts together a mighty fine suit for the occasion. I really admire how well SpongeBob tried to prepare. He even went to the effort to get a limo for Pearl. But the whole night does end up falling apart because, well, he's on stilts, and in retrospect that just wasn't a bright idea. I also like the detail that no one at the prom actually looks that particularly spectacular. You know what I mean? They all look so average and, well, normal. Even Pearl's ex-boyfriend, tall, tan, and handsome, looks like, well, a bit of a geek. Pearl complains a lot, but at the end it's her that goes to comfort SpongeBob when he thinks he ruined her evening.
Actually, it was pretty funny when that hot dog landed in Judy's hair.
It's actually quite a beautiful, sweet moment, and the two end up having a fair bit more fun afterwards. It feels like a realistic teen prom, you know, where no one looks particularly great and lots of embarrassing things happen. That's just teenage years in a nutshell. Our well-intentioned friends at the Spongebob Wiki label this a non-infamous episode. Let's see what they say about it.
A small number of people call this Scumbob because it's Pearl torture. Imagine your chance at going to the prom being ruined by a cheese block.
Huh, really? In the end, they both seem to have a lot of fun, and I think SpongeBob worked really hard to present himself well for Pearl. And personally, my chances of going to the prom were ruined because I didn't have a cheese block willing to chaperone me. I mean, at the time, I sure as hell couldn't find a date.
I would have gone with you, honey.
Oh, thanks, love. If there's a reunion, maybe we could dance a foxtrot together. Either way, I think Chaperone is one of the sweetest episodes of the first season. Our next choice is Hall Monitor. SpongeBob's in boating school, and it's his turn to be Hall Monitor for the day. To say he takes the job seriously would be a severe understatement. Pretty much the entire story is dedicated to him taking this tiny job way too far and causing chaos in Bikini Bottom. He's just so fixated on his job as a hall monitor, he spends the whole school day doing a speech of acceptance.
Crime and punishment, punishment and crime.
So Miss Puff agrees to let him wear the uniform until the next day.
What are the consequences of what I've just done?
Oh, Mrs. Puffs, if only you could see. This is one of those cases where SpongeBob's excitement is so wholesome and energized that it's catchy. And it's fun to see him try and help the city, even if he's accidentally causing havoc. I have no idea why he felt the need to direct traffic, but at least he made it fun before he caused a 9-car pileup. The town sees SpongeBob as a maniac on the loose and is paralyzed with fear.
City paralyzed with fear! Take it, friends. Arm yourselves with knowledge.
Probably my favorite joke is when the police confront Patrick about whether he's seen him, and every time they show him SpongeBob on the poster, he just loses his crap. The cops' faces to Patrick's reactions. This is one of those cases where I do find Patrick's stupidity really funny. It's also a case where SpongeBob's enthusiasm carries the episode, and it's a good example of SpongeBob and Patrick working as a very funny duo. The only big problem I had? It's unfortunately a beginning of that bad habit of the show repeatedly throwing Mrs. Puffs in jail. Our next episode is Tea at the Tree Dome. In this first season, we're introduced to Sandy quickly and simply. We meet her when SpongeBob's trying to help her stop a clan. And, oh my, that angle was a choice. Anyway, Sandy invites Spongy over to her place for tea, and SpongeBob wants to try hard to impress her by being fancy. See, I don't get why this was so difficult for the Sandy movie. Both characters here in this simple episode have their own distinct personalities, and SpongeBob's not just reduced to being a happy-go-lucky joke machine. Here, he has wants and needs, like air. This episode's fine. The main joke here is just watching SpongeBob get baked heavily and all the way he's continually suffering. But in my opinion, it's not done in a particularly cruel way. He's putting himself through this for a very silly reason.
I don't need it.
He could just speak up at any time and tell Sandy, "Hey, I need water." It's a nice simple lesson of the day here. When you do have a need, speak up. Chances are your friend or date won't mind either way. At least Sandy learned something to report to Texas Science. Sea sponges need water. Our next choice is Culture Shock. The Krusty Krab is struggling to bring in customers. So Krabs is looking for marketing gimmicks. So they organize a talent show at the Krusty Krab. And with Squidward as a talent scout, we get some funny performances from both Pearl and even Plankton. SpongeBob really wants to act, but Squidward continually shuns his pitches. But realistically, he would work amazing as a circus performer. And we see at the end just how pleasing Spongy is to the audience, because he saves the show by cleaning for some reason. It's a shame Squidward takes it so badly that he's not the star act, because he's still the talent manager and he can help bring about very entertaining acts like SpongeBob and Pearl. Even if he wasn't frontline talent, he was still a very valuable part of the show. Interestingly, this episode wasn't listed on the Scumbob wiki, but it was on the anti-Scumbob wiki. What did they say about it, Nin?
Culture Shock is an ultra famous episode. It has a creative story, good music, and visuals. And Squidward gets his comeuppance for being an arrogant jerk.
It also contains a very popular meme from the talent show cheering and booing scene. There's a lot of creativity here. I'd call it an above average first season episode. Our next choice is Plankton. Well, given this episode is directly after jellyfishing, at least it's good to see Squidward recovered from his injury. Surprisingly, Plankton starts with one of his most creative, twisted schemes in the whole series in his introducing episode, hijacking SpongeBob's brain and literally rewiring it from the inside. I know it sounds gross, but it's done with such tooniness that it's a fascinating watch, and it's more like Plankton is puppeteering SpongeBob's body rather than controlling his mind.
Shut your mouth, you mediocre clarinet player. Mediocre?
A psychologist might say he hijacks SpongeBob's primary motor and somatosensory cortex. You know, if they're big dorks like me. Any other cartoon I could think of, this would be one of the creepiest episodes in the series. But SpongeBob does it so comedically, it's just funny. Like, the grossest part to me is actually SpongeBob turning his eyes on the inside of his head to see Plankton. But despite that, it works for the silliness of the episode. In fact, the entire episode works so well that the series revisits the concept in the episode Inside Job. And my next episode choice is Pickles. Well, it's our first introduction to Bubble Bass, and Spongy's clearly already familiar with him.
Bubble Bass.
Squarepants.
As they leer at each other like old enemies. Bubble Bass is a bit of a picky food critic, but I do like how orange his shirt is. But he destroys SpongeBob's confidence when he claims Spongy forgot the pickles on his burger.
The best there is? I don't think so.
And this gives SpongeBob so much anxiety that he loses the ability to make the Krabby Patty.
Bun down, shoe, mustard, pan, bun now!
I think what I find most interesting to this episode is seeing how others interpret SpongeBob's loss of ability and functionality. Some feel he's got the yips, like some experienced athletes get. Some of my fellow neurodivergent friends can relate to this loss of functionality as one of the challenges of being on the spectrum, while some relate to it as the crippling effects of generalized anxiety. Some see OCD, some see perfectionism, and personally I think all those perspectives are valid. I think the beauty of this episode is so many people can relate to SpongeBob's challenge.
Mr. Krabs, I am so confused. I can't remember how to do anything.
But it's done in a way where I find it funny, but I take it seriously at the same time. Like when SpongeBob forgets where the door is.
The door! Mr. Krabs, the front door is missing!
Like, it's funny, but you probably get it. It's quite a heartwarming story in the end, because eventually Mr. Krabs helps SpongeBob regain his confidence and ability.
If you learn to make a Krabby Patty again, your life will be back in order.
Mr. Krabs, I don't know if
Take your time.
And it turns out Bubble Bass was cheating the whole time. I actually don't like this ending that much. I would have actually preferred if SpongeBob legitimately made a mistake. That shows that making a mistake is okay. It shows we're not all perfect, but that's okay. But in the end, Pickles still gets a very relatable message across.
It's time.
Our next Spongy episode is Texas. Here we're introduced to a lot of Sandy's backstory. Like we learn about her original home, Texas. Later we'll learn about the weird lab she works for there. This is probably the first time we've seen one of the SpongeBob characters in a huge emotional slump.
Go away.
And for that character in a slump to be the cheery, positive Sandy, it's weirdly confronting. The start in particular really gets me, where we see Sandy so unresponsive to SpongeBob when she's so homesick.
Listen, SpongeBob, right now, I don't want to build sandcastles, play karate, or eat jellyfish.
I actually find it a little heartbreaking. If you've ever been away and missed your home, you probably get that deep sadness she's feeling. And when she bursts out crying before flushing out her tears, is it possible to be both heartbroken and laughing? Because this moment gives me serious ambivalence. Some people say they get sad on the Gary "Have you seen this snail" episode, but for me personally, this is probably the episode that gets me most sad.
Don't you want to say goodbye to all your friends down at the Krusty Krab?
I just can't do that, SpongeBob. It'd be too sad.
We also get Sandy's first solo song.
The ocean's no place for a squirrel.
And while I don't personally consider Sandy a harmonious singer, I think she packs her songs with so much earnesty that I always give her a pass.
When I'm so far from you, Texas, all I can do is cry.
As a last resort, they have to taunt her over to the Krusty Krab to stall her leaving, because they want to give her a surprise. And I gotta admit, this silly taunting of Texas is really funny to me.
Hey, Patrick, what am I now?
Stupid?
No, I'm Texas!
What's the difference?
But the anti-Scumball wiki had an interesting take on it.
This is a high, super famous episode. There's a heartwarming message that says home is a place where friends care about you. While SpongeBob and Patrick saying stupid things about Texas is funny, it could be seen as racist.
While I didn't personally interpret it that way, I would be curious of your opinion on that, particularly if you're from Texas. Once they do get Sandy to the restaurant, they try to bring a bit of Texas to her, which is sweet. Even though I felt her first movie was bad, at least poor Sandy finally got to visit Texas and see her family again. Our next choice is Nature Pants. This episode always makes me wonder if SpongeBob should have tried being a park ranger. We can very clearly see, in these early seasons particularly, he has a very strong connection with nature. Another interesting thing is, we have a very underplayed moment here in this episode. SpongeBob literally quits his job. In fact, he walks out on it.
I'll show him. Barnacles.
Given the depressed response when he was fired in later seasons, I sadly can't see him ever quitting his job again. Though I hope I'm wrong on that, it would be cool if he branched out. He really takes us to the extreme too, literally giving away all his possessions, tuckering out naked, and buzzing off into nature. Also, I really love this meta joke from Squidward here. Feels very ahead of its time.
I'll give him a week.
I'll give him 11 minutes.
Despite this being an extreme change for SpongeBob, it still feels very light in tone. It's just this young, impressionable SpongeBob getting too caught up in an idea. Fun fact, at SpongeBob's age in this episode, 14 to 17, I also set out on my own, in my case trying to backpack on the road, and I was really going through a strong nature phase. I still love nature in the forest to this day, but I do love to sleep in my own bed. But at the time, I felt living on the road was a true way for me to live. And I lasted longer than 11 minutes, but still not that long before I missed a regular hot shower and a reliable place to sleep. Hot showers are so good when you've been in the rough. And anyway, what I'm trying to say is, I really connect with SpongeBob's mindset here. Eventually, Sandy tries to bring her friend back by tempting him home with some, cooked food. And Patrick just kind of loses his mind.
If I can't have you as a friend, I'm gonna make you a trophy!
It's such an insightful look at SpongeBob's character.
Hello, I'm Jellybob, and you are?
When I watch Nature Pants, I just find myself really engaged with SpongeBob's journey. It's very relatable. And our next choice is Employee of the Month. This is a good example of SpongeBob's fixations and his anxiety getting the better of him. Definitely some potential examples of the symptoms he might have from being on the spectrum. Having gotten Employee of the Month 43 times in a row, SpongeBob gets very, very anxious that Squidward might get it instead this month. And to Squidward's credit, he tries to explain to Spongy he doesn't have to worry because the award is a farce.
Don't you know that award is a load of garbage?
Unlike Krabs, Squidward doesn't fuel Spongy's anxiety. I'm a person who really appreciates transparency, and you can't deny Squidward's really good at that. If you've ever wanted a clear example of SpongeBob being on the spectrum, this is a good example of an episode. As Tom Kenny said, of course he is. The way he can fixate on interests and goals, the perfectionism, the social struggles to fit in, the black and white thinking and emotional struggles, this episode really highlights that to me. That aside, I felt things got really funny in this episode when Squidward starts to also lose his mind over the award. And the two compete so obsessively that they destroy the restaurant. But you know, Krabs was fueling SpongeBob's anxiety for years on end. He kinda had this one coming. Our next episode is Home Sweet Pineapple. Well, it turns out SpongeBob's pineapple house really is a pineapple, because Spongy's entire house is eaten by nematodes, aka eelworms. With his house gone, he's unfortunately got to move back in with his folks, unless they can build him a new house. And it's a delightful sight to see them try. Like, when SpongeBob starts doing the pipe while doing his plumbing, for some reason, the entire ocean turns around. Why? I have no idea, but it's so unexpected it had me laughing. Or this scene where we see the finished product.
Yeah! So, what do you think?
I was like, no freaking way it went that well. How are they gonna pull the rug from under us here? Is it a painting? Oh no.
I wish I lived there.
Really?
No.
Also, there's a fun little bit of canon here in the story.
When my parents kicked me out of the house, I never went back.
It turns out in the Patrick show, Patrick's parents would eventually kick him out of the house. Huh. When rebuilding fails, SpongeBob tries living with Patrick. When that fails, he sneaks into Squidward's house to try and live with him. But in the end, just before he leaves to live with his folks again, the seed he planted grows him a new pineapple house. I can certainly understand why the anti-Scumbob wiki had some high praise for this episode.
This is a super famous episode of SpongeBob because it's funny. And it teaches a lot of life lessons from the three characters' perspectives. For SpongeBob, never give up too early. For Patrick, be a loyal and helpful friend, especially for those in need. For Squidward, never celebrate too early.
Huh, that was weirdly nuanced for these wikis. Nicely said, editor. Overall, this episode has a warm feeling to it and I liked a lot of the jokes. And it's a reminder of how hard it can be sometimes just to find a place to call your own. Next episode is the very first episode, Help Wanted. This is a simple but smooth start to the series, with SpongeBob starting the entire series by first announcing he's naked.
I'm naked!
Particularly in Help Wanted, I feel the vibes of Rocko's modern life really hard in this show, which was a Nickelodeon show I grew up with before SpongeBob. Many of Rocko's creators went on to make SpongeBob, and it really shows here. There's just this slight edge to it. SpongeBob reminds me of Rocko here, where he's got a positive spirit, but life can just be mean to him. Plus, they're both kind of weak and puny, as Spongy promptly demonstrates. And they both have a really stupid friend. I always find myself drawn to the beautiful animation jokes of this episode and how much is told by the way Spongy's body is twisted and contorted. You really feel the sponginess of this fella. While some first seasons of cartoons can have kinda off-character versions of the characters we grow to love, SpongeBob feels almost identical to his character in season 13 as he does to season 1. Patrick's definitely not as stupid as he eventually would be, but SpongeBob's pretty on point from the beginning. Yeah, we had some bad character writing in some of the mid-seasons, but this is one first episode that started out strong and consistent. SpongeBob just walks into the Krusty Krab and does his best to get a job as a fry cook. Plus, that scene with the tuna overflowing the Krabby Patty is some of the most fascinating animation scenes of the show. And our next episode is Bubble Stand. This is a really funny, cute episode. At this early point in the show, I'm still actually enjoying Patrick's character. You can tell he's a bit dim, but he's got some basic practicality, and he's not as dangerously, obnoxiously stupid as he would eventually become in later seasons. And I've always really liked this joke here. SpongeBob sells Patrick some bubbles by giving him the quarter so he can buy it from him.
I'm gonna need to borrow a quarter.
Sure thing, Patrick.
It's a very wholesome joke that subtly shows the seamless friendship these two have in the early series. In fact, it's so wholesome that they successfully pull this joke off twice. As a whole, I think the jokes in this episode are really charming and perfectly paced.
It's a giraffe!
For example, I love the prolonged scene of Patrick failing to blow a bubble and just blowing out a ridiculously long raspberry. As Spongy just watches patiently. Then he wordlessly places the lesson sign. And this quote-unquote method SpongeBob uses to blow the bubbles has to be one of the most memorable moments in the show. He does one of the most random, bizarre dances that feels like the kind of thing a child's string of consciousness would develop on the spot. But I love that it works flawlessly. Bring it around town.
Bring it around town.
It's so unashamedly stupid that I always end up laughing. Once again, Season 1 shows us here how simple a cartoon story can be, yet so rich in atmosphere. I really like the slower pace to this episode, how it'll gently waft the harp music, or play circus music as the bubbles float. Or we get the longest raspberry in human history, like how did they get away with this? And how long it takes Squidward to admit defeat and just try the stupid technique. It's one of the most chill episodes in the entire series, at least till Squidward gets frustrated and accidentally blows his entire house away. A 110% classic episode. And next up we have Arrgh. Yep, that's the name of the episode. Arrgh. It's a quiet day at the Krusty Krab, so SpongeBob and Patrick are playing a board game. That's so casual, I love it. But soon, Krabs gets so obsessed with the game that he literally closes the restaurant and just plays all day with them.
Rev up those fryers, cause I am sure hungry for one. Help! Help!
And as I said earlier, I appreciate moments like this in early season.
Mr. Krabs, I wanna go to bed!
These moments of SpongeBob acting human and actually having some backbone. Unlike seasons 5 to 6, where he's basically Mr. Krabs' lapdog.
Now get to work!
Aye, sir.
Here, he has his limits and doesn't get pushed around by the guy.
Go home already.
But Krabs has the pirate fever and sets SpongeBob and Patrick on a pirate adventure with him, searching for buried treasure. I find season 1 can feel a little claustrophobic. It's very set in this one place, barely leaving SpongeBob's neighborhood or the Krusty Krab. So it's kind of nice in episodes like this where they actually travel a bit, even if it's just locally to search for pretend buried treasure. And obviously, yeah, it's pretend. Krabs made the whole treasure up, as if you're surprised by that. Though it turns out the board game is based off a real treasure, which they find, and Krabs of course tries to take for himself.
What shares? You're not getting any of my treasure!
And once again, season 6 SpongeBob probably would have allowed this without question, but early SpongeBob, he demands his fair share.
We found it together, so we deserve a share!
And good on him for not taking crap from Krabs. This would be my main feedback for later seasons of the show. Make sure SpongeBob keeps his backbone, because neither children or adults should be taught that being bullied or pushed around is okay. We also get the second appearance of the Flying Dutchman, and he's eager for his treasure back.
I'm the Flying Dutchman.
I definitely got some laughs here, and I call Arrgh a mighty fine episode. Our next episode is Squeaky Boots. Do you remember this one? Mr. Krabs gets his daughter Pearl some squeaky fishing boots. Pearl, being 16 and not a fisher, understandably hates them.
You really shouldn't have!
Finding himself stuck with a $2 pair of boots, he swindles SpongeBob into taking them instead of his paycheck. Of course, these boots squeak a lot, and SpongeBob proudly wears them wherever he goes. But the squeaking drives everyone insane. This is another case where I feel SpongeBob's enthusiasm really carries the episode. But some people don't like this episode because the squeaking annoys them. I definitely get this, but I personally find the squeaking really funny, and the repetition only makes me laugh more. I guess because I'm one of those people who likes to make a squeaky sound when my shoes have been in the rain. Purely because I find the noise funny. One of those things I guess you do in life just for the lols. So I guess this humor's right up my alley, but your mileage may vary. Like to me, this makes me laugh a lot. It's like the show is trolling Mr. Krabs and I love it. But for example, on the Spongebob wiki, it has mixed reviews.
This is a non-infamous episode, but it ain't squeaky clean. Because when Mr. Krabs is a cheapskate, we're given a living hell of obnoxious squeaking. But it's also funny creative, and has great visuals.
Well, I respect that perspective, but for me, Squeaky Boots is one of my favorite episodes of the first season. And our next choice is Ripped Pants. Back in school, we used to have this term called the class clown, essentially the student that tried to make the other students laugh. It may not hugely surprise you that I was a class clown. In like every grade, I loved making the other kids laugh, and so does SpongeBob here. But he misses such an important point. You need new material, my friend. If you repeat the same joke over and over, the laughs end. And you just look like a bloody palooka.
That kind of stuff is uncalled for.
Also, a good example of SpongeBob still being a smart fella with basic common sense.
Pretending to drown. No.
And Spongy really overuses this ripped pants shtick. He wears it out so badly that he basically becomes a pariah and has to sing a song about it. SpongeBob really seems to struggle with his masculinity in these early 4 seasons. In Tea at the Tree Dome, he has to prove to Sandy that he doesn't need air. Then here, he can't prove how strong he is, so he's got to prove how funny he is. Same thing happens in Musclebob Buffpants. And finally, it all crescendos in the first SpongeBob movie, where SpongeBob asks himself, what does it really mean to be quote-unquote a man? At this early stage, they're still adding a lot of that insecurity to SpongeBob's character. Whenever I'm starting to get sick of SpongeBob's repeated failing jokes and ripped pants, I'm always won over by the conclusion where he starts a ragtag band of misfits who normalize doing something silly.
I got sand in my buns.
I forgot to put on sunscreen.
What happened to you?
And most importantly, they show it's okay to do something embarrassing or mess up. These things happen. I'm not saying I think every SpongeBob episode needs a stronger message, but I think these messages in early seasons are so damn transparent and earnest that I can't help but enjoy them. Our next episode is Suds. I've praised this episode before, but we're covering every Season 1 episode, and it's well worth mentioning. And Tom Kenny also happened to have a cold while voicing SpongeBob in this one, and you can totally hear it.
Oh, Gary. I feel horrible.
I think the voice performance here is half of what puts me so well in SpongeBob's shoes. When I hear him, he sounds as genuinely miserable and run down as I feel when I'm sick. It's that tired bleh feeling where everything is just too much and you just can't even.
I've got the suds, no doubt about it.
SpongeBob does call Sandy to take him to the doctor, but before she can get to him, Patrick's on the scene to offer SpongeBob all the homeopathic bullcrap the sea sponge can sink his teeth into. First, he tries to discredit the doctor by scaring SpongeBob into thinking the doctor is scary to visit.
Then the doctor pulls out his stethoscope!
Followed by quite a selection of alternative medicine.
Feeling better yet?
Not really.
They even lampshade Patrick giving a Band-Aid solution by Patrick literally putting a giant Band-Aid on SpongeBob repeatedly. Probably the most memorable scene for me was when SpongeBob sees a real doctor and he's given the sponge treatment, which is seeing him cleaned in live action like a real sponge, and scrubbing Tom Kenny on the back in the shower, because poor Tom Kenny just can't get a break from this show, even when he's showering. Then SpongeBob cleans a dish and a car to get all the suds completely out of him.
I feel as good as new. I love the doctor.
Good on you, Spongy, and I love this episode.
Here's your lollipop.
Our next episode is Karate Choppers. Okay, I have to point out, I had way more fun watching these two in a Season 1 11-minute episode than I did in the entire Sandy Cheeks movie, which I'm gonna guess had quadruple the budget, at least. Both are about SpongeBob and Sandy spending time together, yet Karate Choppers feels so much more sincere and endearing, and more true to the characters. Anyway, here we're introduced to one of SpongeBob and Sandy's favorite hobbies, karate.
Karate.
Money, spatula.
And yeah, these two are obsessed with karate. And I still feel seeing these two on such similar wavelengths bonding together is one of the most endearing parts of the series. The episode takes me back to being a kid where you try and catch your friend or sibling off guard while you're playing a game. And it's clear they're having so much fun with it. It's hard not to get caught up in their excitement in their game. In fact, Spongy is so immersed in practicing and playing that it interrupts his work. Krabs even threatens to fire SpongeBob if he doesn't give up karate. So in another very charming moment, Sandy sees how serious this is and promises not to do any more karate if Krabs will keep SpongeBob on the job.
Mr. Krabs, it's not his fault. It's mine.
And in a surprisingly unique scene for these two, Spongy and Sandy go on a picnic. For some reason, this is something the two never do alone again. But it's just such wholesome bonding, I love it.
I'm stupid!
And yes, obviously, they do return to the activity they love, karate. Karate Choppers has some really cool animation. I love the way they can karate chop stuff into tiny pieces. It's another classic episode that feels like a warm blanket. It makes me smile and I enjoy these two every time I see this one. Also, I feel like this is the most satisfying sound in the world.
Ooh, yeah.
Our next episode is The Paper. There's no better demonstration of how important imagination is. Squidward throws away a piece of paper and SpongeBob is shocked. Not because Squidward is littering and it's the most strict town for littering in the world, but because this piece of paper offers SpongeBob so many opportunities to play, like origami and disguises.
I'm SpongeBob Jungle Pants!
It's a very similar concept to Idiot Box, which we'll see later in Season 3. Like in that, Squidward finds himself regretting throwing away what he thought was trash.
Hey, that little paper does seem like fun.
And soon he begs for it back. And I love how desperate he gets, giving away everything he owns, including the shirt on his back. And Squiddy's demented pleasure as he tries to have even a quarter of the fun SpongeBob had with that stupid piece of paper.
Gentlemen, start your engines! I'm flying!
I mean, though, credit for how hard he tries. And realistically, I think SpongeBob would have given Squidward stuff back later. I don't think he'd leave his neighbor like that. But it is a really funny finish. There's few shows I can think of that would have the main character playing by themselves with a tiny piece of paper. Because they've always got a unique take, let's hear what the Spongebob Wiki thinks.
This episode is wet paper. There aren't many funny jokes, and it's filled with too much Squidward torture. But it also spawned the famous lawn chair meme, and that's funny.
Oh yeah, I love that meme. And yeah, fair point, I guess Squidward does get a lot of suffering in this episode. But in this case, I personally laugh a lot in the paper episode every time I see it. Our next episode is Rock Bottom. This episode was so memorable that it created the permanent town in SpongeBob's undersea world, Rock Bottom. It may just be a neighboring town at the bottom of a mountain, but it feels like the middle of nowhere. You see, Spongy and Patrick are returning on the bus from Glove World, but they accidentally take the wrong bus, and Spongy gets trapped alone in the spooky and mysterious Rock Bottom. Part of what I think makes this episode so special is Rock Bottom does feel so foreign from Bikini Bottom. It feels almost like we're entering a different country.
I can't understand your accent.
And there's this great atmosphere built by the colors and lighting that makes SpongeBob feel so isolated and alone, late at night in unknown lands. And they capture that discomfort of his isolation well. As I mentioned in a previous video, this doesn't happen as often nowadays because many people have GPSs on their phones and can just call an Uber. But back when I was younger, we only had street directories and this would happen to me too sometimes. I'd take the wrong bus and end up in the wrong place, asking around desperately trying to figure out which bus to get home. I really feel on that difficult journey with SpongeBob. He's trying to keep his spirits up, but he's only human Sponge and gets frustrated. Because in true Rocko's Modern Life fashion, everything goes wrong for him. And the buses, oh jeebus the buses, they are most certainly against him. This episode delivers everything for me. I get lots of chuckles from it, and I get really immersed in SpongeBob's journey home. And last but certainly not least, we have Pizza Delivery. This is not only known as one of the best classic episodes, it's thought to be by many one of the best episodes of the whole series. What can I honestly say that hasn't already been said? I thought hard about this episode, and I think part of what makes it so special is how well SpongeBob and Squidward work as a comedy duo. Take this scene where SpongeBob starts the car, floors it backwards for miles, I'm gonna guess, and screams back up the whole way. When they finally run out of gas, rather than Squidward doing the typical angry tirade at SpongeBob's incompetence, he just says,
Well, you backed up.
That's just good comedy timing right there. It's interesting because when you look at it, not that many scenery changes even happen in this episode. This is easily an episode that could have been made on a tight animation budget. Compared to later seasons anyway, nothing too wacky happens to them. Yet I'm so invested in seeing these two make their way to their pizza destination. And many fans of the show appreciate in this episode that Squidward genuinely cares enough about SpongeBob to make some really kind gestures, like pushing him out of the way of a truck. Or perhaps most famously, delivering the pizza for him after he's been bullied by the customer.
Look, I told your little friend I ain't paying for that!
Well, this one's on the...
It shows Squidward doesn't want to see SpongeBob hurt and doesn't want people to hurt him. He just finds Spongy annoying to work with, and yeah, I kinda get that. Pizza Delivery is a feel-good SpongeBob episode that's a pleasure to look back on with funny scenes from start to finish. And if you do like these longer videos and would like me to look at the next season of SpongeBob in its entirety like this, I'd be glad to. Thanks to my bosses on Patreon for making this goal video happen. If not for them, I'd be an incompetent electrician right now. And thank you for watching, and whether I see you next time or not, I'll be back. And as well as thanks to my bosses you see here, I've tried showing my patrons' names slightly different this time, so I also get to show you their cool icons. And of course, thanks to my bosses in my shout-out tier. These people are Anna Jones, Pro Craftinators, Matthew Forrest, John Bondi, Thomas Fernando, Angel Angeline, 3 Cat Day. I like that name, it's just what I need right now. Alex Inza, Shaw, Skyzo, The Furry of Fury, Cookie Monster, Noel Schornhorst, Shockwave FPS Studios, The Lovely Miss Arceus, Fluff Paws, Matthew Kirkland, The Goober, Asher Gatchabasta, Jacob Snyder, Undead Sparrow, Joseph Bowers, Jenny Smith, Chris Mendez, Emily Bennett, Jordan McCann, Chris with 2 S's, Shoff, Ocean Survival, Chandler Amethyst, 2006 Honda Accord, don't crash it, Megan Bruns, Pam de Bear, yeah that's it, FCL, The Hug Wizard, Rayan Graves, $Atta Nuanoshi, Eagle Talon, William Johnson, I Cosmic, and Dason. And now be horrified, for now is a return of Pud Comics. The mighty warrior has lost his sword. Who will save him?
The mole babe will. And look at what cute shoes she's wearing. It's terrible.
I don't know, is that funny to you?
No.
I guess. Anyway.
Pep, so lovely to have you for tea.
I don't think I'm gonna let you dog sit anymore. It's funny because the dog is wearing makeup. Ha ha ha. Oh,
Look at the pearls on it too. And pink hair, why not?
Pink hair on the dog. I don't know, I think it looks pretty cool.
Yeah, you like the pink hair? We can start band practice when you're ready, Pad.
Hold on, I need to plug in my electric cowbell.
Cowbell.
Cow. It's funny because it goes moo. Great playing catch with a girl, because this is 1900. Can you show me how you throw so hard?
Yeah, I did good.
Yeah, you did good.
I did good.
You're a super thrower, see?
Yeah, see?
Yeah,
Showed you.
Showed me.
I don't think that is...
Shadow. It's gonna make it in.
I don't think that's what your parents had in mind.
He's a real artist, this fella, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
He's drawing pictures of himself and painting pictures of himself, and now he's like painting the entire... He's gonna be a real artist.
Oh, yeah.